Hi everybody, I'm Matt Robinson. Welcome to the latest edition of the Writer's Block. Today we'll be talking with poet, flash fiction writer, educator, PR mastermind, and personal friend Zvi Sesling. Zvi worked, as I said, in PR, education, and writing for many years. He was the Poet Laureate of Brookline, Massachusetts in 2017. He's been awarded first prize in the Reuben Rose International Poetry Competition and nominated for the Pushcart Prize 5 times. Tons of other awards, including the National Jewish Poetry Book Award and the Mass Center for the Book Poetry Award, and he serves as the editor of the Muddy River Poetry Review. So the poetry bona fides are definitely there. He's also written, though, in flash fiction, which are stories with a shorter range of words than traditional short stories. And his latest collection is called Secret Behind the Gate, which we'll be discussing today. Zvi and I have known each other since I was a student of his at Emerson, and it's really great to have you back. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here with you and see how you've developed over the years. That's great.
Thank you very much. Always so generous and supportive.
In fact, you wrote a great book, too, called Lions, Tigers, and Bulldogs. That is really a fun book to read.
Guess this is a real mutual admiration society, as you know, at least this way it should be, because you've had quite the career. So let's start at the beginning. What was your first profound experience with writing? When did you think that this would be kind of your path to something?
Well, there's two parts of that. The first part was when I was in second grade. It was mid-February. There was a fire up the street, and I went up to see what was going on, and the firefighters and the police had these icicles hanging off their hats, and I said, that's not for me. And I went home, and there was a radio program called Front Page Farrell. I think it started with Richard Widmark. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a reporter. So I ended up on newspapers for several years and then went into public relations. It was in high school where I had two great writing teachers. One of them was a woman named Wanda Bowers, and she was my senior year English teacher, writing teacher, and her first year at that school, she taught Tennessee Williams. So I felt a connection there that was incredible, and I just decided I wanted to do writing.
What was the connection with Williams? What sparked that?
Well, she had taught him. She said that he was a really, I don't want to say obnoxious. What's a little less than obnoxious?
Challenging?
Challenging person to deal with. And then she had me, who was obnoxious. And that was the real connection. I said, well, if he could be that way, I can be that way, and I can write too.
So what got you into from the journalism side to the PR side?
I went in the service. And when I came out, the newspaper offered me the same salary that I had before I went in several years earlier, and PR person offered me 3.5 times as much money. And at the time, I had a wife and a newborn baby, and I said, guess what? And it ended up, I loved PR. I liked the challenge. I liked dealing with various situations and writing publicity for people.
What were some of the lessons you learned from, you did a lot of crisis communications, yes? So about how words can impact people and impact situations.
Well, it's true. In advertising, it's much more so where the impact is and try to influence you. With press releases, I learned that if I communicated properly with the media, I would get the story into the newspaper or on radio or television, and it was how you did it without being blatantly bragging or blatantly humble. You had to find that fine line, and I tried to stay that way until I got to teaching.
What was that transition like from, doing it for people to teaching other people how to do it?
Well, at that point, I had my own business in PR, and I thought I could impart some of what I've learned about writing and dealing with the media and dealing with your clients to my students. And so I did that primarily in the writing area.
And that's, that's where we met.
That's where we met.
Right.
You were one of my better students.
You taught primarily at Emerson and BU.
Yeah, that's correct.
Were there differences in the student bodies there, with Emerson being kind of more all about communication? I mean, BU obviously has the great communication school, but Emerson, that's sort of like what it's all about. So did you notice any differences there?
Emerson had a lot of Asian and South American students. One of my classes was, I think, about 90% Taiwanese. Another one I had 8 or 9 South American students. And when I was at BU, there were a lot of Saudi Arabians, Qataris, Kuwaitis. I'd get a different focus for them because they had a completely different idea of what they should be doing.
So the cultural differences impacted how they understood using language and things of that sort.
Yeah.
And also you probably had to teach them a little English at the same time.
Well,
The
it was interesting.
jargon of the field.
The Arabic students had a good command of the English language, and the South Americans did. The Taiwanese, the Indonesians had a problem with our idioms and also with wording things properly, but they were all good students, and I never really subtracted from a mark because the English wasn't 100%. I thought that would be unfair, especially with American students in there.
Right. So when did poetry and fiction come into play? Was it sort of like a release when the work writing was kind of a little too demanding, or just was it a separate lane?
No, what happened was I wrote a few short stories that were published, and then I got a few rejections, so I thought, oh, these would work as poems, and the poems got accepted where the stories wouldn't. So I did poetry for a long time, but I always wanted to write stories. The novel was never an interest. Short stories were. And so I started writing flash fiction, which some magazines define as 1,000 words or less. I define it as 500 or less, but I've done longer and shorter, and I've gotten a lot of them published in the last couple of years. And then I did the book.
Was the need to tell stories, did that kind of harken back to your journalism days?
The stories, some do. Some are pure fiction, they come out of my head, or I read a story in a paper and I say that would make an interesting piece of fiction, or it's based on my personal experience where I convert it and change names to protect the guilty.
How did the Poet Laureate program in Brookline come? You were involved in establishing it.
Yeah, I thought we should have one in Brookline, and I lobbied what was then called the Board of Selectmen, it's now called the Select Board, and they agreed, and they created the position, and I was offered that, but I turned it down. I didn't want to create it and be the first one. So we had a wonderful woman named Judith Steinberg was our first one, and then Jan Schreiber was our second one, and then somebody said you should apply for it, so I did. I served for 3 years.
When you say serve, what are the duties of the roles of the position?
Well, what I did, each Poet Laureate does their own thing, and my thing was to hold readings at the public library that involved another language. And so I would have 10 or 12 readers read a poem in their language and then the translation in English. And I also went into the high schools and the grade schools and talked to them and read them poetry. The high school, I helped out with some poetry, and actually I think one of the kids got published. And anybody who, I think the Rotary or one of those public service groups asked me to come and speak about what was going on. So whatever they asked me to do, I did.
So you really felt there was a way of kind of getting back in with the community and doing
Yes.
service with the talent that you had.
Yes, I had been involved in the town for 30 some odd years, and this was the culmination. I think that sort of ended everything that I had done at the town, starting at the bottom and working my way up.
So you'd mentioned before sort of this tie through this teacher to Tennessee Williams. Who are some of your other like literary heroes, and who have some of the people that you've met or even worked with that have really kind of inspired you, given you great ideas and support?
Well, one time I was flying to Hawaii for Peace Corps training, and the stewardess moved me up to first class and put me in a seat, and I was seated next to James Michener. So I had a great talk with him for about 3.5 hours.
Wow.
And I met some great poets too, like John Ashbery, Charles Simic, who just died, unfortunately, a number of them, and they were all influential. My thing is not to copy anybody. I think a lot of people who write try to copy another writer who's famous, and I said, I'm going to do my own thing, and that's what I did. But those were a few of them, and there are a number I would have liked to have met, like Kurt Vonnegut. And a poet named Wisława Szymborska, who was a Nobel Prize winner in poetry. She was from Poland, one of the finest poets I ever read.
Having worked with younger people, like in the schools and things like that, what changes have you noticed in like the literary landscape? And are there, you do this flash fiction, are there further trends that are exciting you?
Well, no, not really. I think microfiction, which is even shorter, it's 2-3 sentences, that's going to be in my next book too. What I found with the younger people is two things. One is that you try to talk them out of copying other writers. That's number one, but they all have a great interest in writing and putting words together into stories. The bad thing that's happening is this AI and ChatGPT, XYZ, whatever it is, and they create things that are really mediocre through them.
Yeah, I had a student I was teaching this past semester who handed in a paper that was, you can run it through the system that tells you how much was computer generated, and it said 100% computer generated. So I handed it back with no grade, and the student's like, why did you not give me a grade? I was like, because I don't know which computer wrote it. So, yeah, it's excellent. It's potentially scary times for
Yeah.
literate people. So you mentioned that some of your early poems had been another form and you saw that they might have more success reaching people published as poems. What is and also you talked about how you don't want to copy other people even if they're popular. Has that impacted your experience in terms of dealing with publishers and dealing with, audience?
I'm not the kind of writer who goes with large publishers like Knopf or, Penguin or something like that. I do small publishers, and that has not really impacted. Where it's impacted is in individual magazines where some of the editors don't like my style, and c'est la vie.
Right.
My short stories, I wrote 2 science fiction ones that were sort of strange, and a magazine in Canada just loved them and picked them up, and they were a little over 1,000 words each.
One of your favorite topics I know is baseball, because we used to talk about this when I was in your class. I understand you brought some of your baseball themed pieces with you today. Would you mind sharing a couple with us?
Oh, I'll share one with you. Just happen to have it here.
How convenient.
It's called Kennesaw's Revenge. Kennesaw Mountain Landis, commissioner of baseball, the man who banned the Black Sox from baseball forever in the 1920s, next heard about Jackie Mitchell, a 17-year-old girl who one afternoon while pitching for the Chattanooga Lookouts back in the 1930s struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. It was too much for the commissioner to take, so to make sure she never played professional baseball again, he voided her contract, and in 1952, baseball completed striking out women by banning them from pro ball altogether. Now that's a true poem. It's based on reality, and to this day, women are not in Major League Baseball. They can be umpires, they can be in the executive office, they can sit along the foul lines for the foul ball, but they can't play. And that excludes the movie that was made, A League of Their Own, which was done because of the war. But it's a sad but true story.
Do you think more enlightened minds might change that policy at any time, or is it just sort of so
I don't know.
established and understood that it is?
It's 71 years now. Someday it'll come along. I mean, you have a women's football league and you have a women's basketball league, and they have women's
Hockey.
softball and hockey, and they have women wrestlers. So someday, hopefully, the women will get to play baseball.
If they want to.
If they want to. Well, you have two lovely little twins. They can play short and second.
Yeah, well, I'm not seeing that right now, but you never know. You never know. So this is one of your favorites. How do you choose your other topics? What are some other themes that you keep coming back to for
in
material?
poetry or in writing?
In any of your writing.
The easiest way to say it is whatever grabs me, but it can be news, it can be history, it can be personal experience. Some of the baseball poems deal with the Red Sox, Carlton Fisk's famous home run. Some of the stories deal with, I read one time a story about, unfortunately it happens too often, about a man who had tried to murder his wife. So I did sort of a comedy story of that, where he's trying to think of different things to do, and he realizes the police will discover each one of them, and that's, you know, if you do it right, it's okay. If you do it wrong, you're really in trouble. And that particular story that I just mentioned, a lot of people liked it. 2 or 3 magazines have published it.
Oh. Who do you have do you have an editor or someone to check your stuff before it goes public?
My wife.
There you go.
My wife. My wife taught at Brookline High for 26 years in Maimonides Day School for another 11, and she's a very talented editor and rips my stuff to shreds.
as good editors do.
That's what they do.
Yeah. It's important to have, especially, you know, if you're going to be putting things out in public. There's sensitivities these days you might not be aware of, et cetera. So yeah. It's important.
Well, she's also a feminist, so I don't get away with a lot.
Okay, nice, tight rules. That's important. At least you know what the guidelines are, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, with things like poetry and flash fiction, where the ideas come and the pieces are relatively short, how do you know when a collection is ready? Like, how did you know when the new book was a book?
I wrote one story and I said, oh, this is the last story. This will be at the end. And then I started counting up and I had 175 stories, and I said, whoa, that's enough. Poetry, when I ran out of thoughts for a particular book, like the baseball book. When I ran out of thoughts for the poetry, that was it. I knew that the book was done.
Have you ever had ideas come back a time later that, oh, I wish I had put that in there? Or?
No, what I do is I start another book.
There you go. Yeah, I understand you already have 200 pages into your next one.
Yeah, I'm trying to edit it down some more.
Okay. But how do you know when it's time to sit down and start again, or is it just sort of a constant, like every day you have a new idea?
I don't want to sound obnoxious, but my brain is always functioning on the writing scene. And so whatever I'm doing, like I can see myself doing a story about an interview on a cable TV show with a former student. I'll see that one, and I do it. Whatever is going on in a day, like I was at a supermarket one day, and somebody hit my car while I was in shopping. I came out, and there's this big dent in the car, and I said, "This will be a story about something,"
Do you keep a little notepad with you to jot down ideas?
I usually do. I didn't today. But I had, when I was doing poetry, I carried a little, they call it moleskin, and I would jot it down. And now I have a slightly bigger one, and I jot down story ideas. Sometimes, and this is really, I'm in a car, I'm driving, and I'm listening to the radio, and I get an idea, so I pull over, and I start to put down the idea, and I end up sitting there for 20, 30 minutes, almost flushing out the whole story.
When you have that, from your newspaper days, just always taking notes, figuring out who you need to talk to next, things like that.
Yeah, well, some of the stories do go back to my newspaper days, and some to my teaching days.
What are some of the themes that have come up lately for the latest collection?
Mostly. They have in this one or in the next one?
Well, both. What inspired this one as a collection, and then what have you put together since then?
This one is my first, so it's very eclectic.
Your first flash fiction?
Yeah.
Okay.
They have a little mystery. They have a little science fiction. They have a little tales of experience. The next one is mostly short, based on things that I have read or seen.
For people who aren't familiar with flash fiction, what are some good resources, or what's a good bridge from a form they may know, like poetry, into this more contemporary?
Well, there are some wonderful writers around. There's a woman named Kathy Fish. There is Robert Scodolaro. There is Paul Beckman. There is Karen Schaub. Francine Witt is among the better ones. Also, she's a great writer. Best thing to do, there are also anthologies in which they take different writers and they put in a short story. And if you read those and you find a writer and you say, gee, that writer is really interesting, go out and find their book or order it online and read their whole book.
I see a lot of promise in your continued work. I wish you continued health and success, Professor.
Thank you.
Great to see you again. Great to have you.
Good to see you, Matt.
Everybody, Zvi Sesling, please check out Secrets Behind the Gate and a lot of other amazing work. And please check us out next time on The Writer's Block.